He didn't stop because he had to. He stopped because he was the kind of man who still does. One foggy night on Route 9, a blue-collar dad with calloused hands and an empty wallet pulled a dying woman out of a burning car. A woman worth more than he'd earn in 100 lifetimes. He never gave his name, never asked for a dime, just said 4 words and walked away into the dark. But she never forgot him. And 2 years later, she came back for him, wearing a disguise, hiding a secret, and about to make the worst mistake of her life. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for all 5 parts. The rain had been threatening all evening. It wasn't coming down yet, just hanging in the air like a bad feeling. That heavy mist that makes headlights bleed and road lines blur, and the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. Ethan Cole had driven Route 9 1,000 times. He knew every pothole, every blind curve, every mile marker between the shop where he worked and the small rental house where his son was waiting. He wasn't supposed to be out this late. He'd told Mrs. Diaz next door he'd be back by 8. It was already 1:15. Lucas had school in the morning, and the boy didn't sleep well without his dad home. Never had, not since Karen left. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and one eye on the clock. Then he saw the smoke. Not black smoke, not yet. Just a white curl rising from the tree line near the bend at mile marker 14, pale and ghostly against the dark sky. His foot eased off the gas before his brain had fully registered what his eyes were telling him. Something's wrong. He slowed, leaned forward against the windshield. Then his headlights swung around the curve, and he saw it. A silver Mercedes, or what was left of one, lying on its roof in the shallow drainage ditch off the right shoulder. Steam hissing from the crumpled engine, one wheel still spinning. The guardrail had been sheared clean off. Glass glittered across the asphalt, like someone had scattered 1,000 diamonds and then forgotten to pick them up. Ethan was stopped before he knew he'd stopped. He didn't think. That was the thing people got wrong about moments like this. They assumed brave men ran toward danger after careful deliberation. But Ethan Cole didn't deliberate. His door was open, his boots were on the asphalt, and he was moving before the engine had even finished ticking down. "Hello?" His voice cut through the mist. "Is anyone in there? Hey!" No answer. Just the hiss of steam and the distant sound of something electrical sparking and dying. He dropped to his knees in the wet gravel beside the driver's side window, now the lowest point of the upturned car, and shone his phone flashlight through the cracked glass. She was hanging upside down from the seatbelt. A woman, unconscious or close to it. Dark hair matted against her face, blood running upward along her temple due to the inversion, finding its way along her brow, pooling at her hairline. She was dressed in something that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. None of that mattered. What mattered was that her chest was still moving. "Hey! Hey, can you hear me?" He rapped on the glass. "Lady, wake up! I need you to wake up!" Nothing. He tried the door handle. Buckled, jammed, useless. He stood, scanned the wreckage, spotted a fist-sized chunk of broken guardrail on the road, grabbed it, and brought it into the corner of the window with everything he had. The glass spiderwebbed, but didn't give. Second hit. It caved inward. He knocked the remaining shards clear with his jacket sleeve, cutting his forearm in 3 places, though he wouldn't notice until later, and reached inside. "I'm going to get you out," he said. He said it quietly, almost gently, like he was talking to Lucas when the boy woke up scared in the middle of the night. "You hear me? I'm going to get you out." He could smell the gas now. That wasn't good. He reached in, found the seatbelt release, and braced his other arm across her back so she didn't drop headfirst onto the ceiling-turned floor. She came loose with a lurch, heavier than she looked, and completely limp, and he caught her weight against his chest, dragging her through the broken window frame as carefully and as fast as he could manage. Those two things pulling hard against each other. She made a sound when he moved her. Not words, just a sound. Low, involuntary. The kind a person makes when pain reaches them, even through unconsciousness. "I know," he said. "I know. Almost out." He got her free, pulled her across the gravel, away from the car, away from the gas smell, and set her down on the shoulder as carefully as if she were made of glass. She was breathing. Shallow, uneven, but breathing. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Route 9 was notorious for that. There was a 3-mile dead zone between the ridge and the next town. He'd complained about it at the diner once, and someone had laughed and said, "That's why God invented landlines, son." He looked at the woman. He looked at his truck. He looked back at the car, which had just begun to issue a thin tongue of flame from under the crumpled hood. He made the decision in about 1 second. He lifted her, both arms, fireman carry, the way his older brother had taught him years ago after they'd spent a summer doing volunteer trail rescue together. And he carried her to his truck. "I've got you," he said, settling her across the back seat, tilting her chin to keep her airway clear, the way he barely remembered from a CPR class at work 3 years back. "Just stay with me. Don't go anywhere. Stay right here." He was back behind the wheel and moving before the Mercedes finished burning. Mercy General was 11 minutes away if you drove like a reasonable person. Ethan made it in 7. He didn't run red lights. He just didn't stop at the ones where he could see the cross-traffic was clear. And he didn't lift his foot when the speedometer said things his usual self would have argued with. He kept one eye on the road and one on the rearview mirror, watching the woman's chest, counting the rises and falls, the way you'd count a child's breaths when the fever is bad and the night feels very long. 1, 2, 3. Still there. "Hey, talk to me." He reached back and found her hand in the dark, squeezed it once. It was cold. "What's your name? You got anybody I should call?" She didn't answer. Her hand didn't squeeze back. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's fine. We're almost there." He pulled into the emergency drop-off at Mercy General, with a screech that brought 2 orderlies and a security guard to the door before he was fully stopped. He was out of the truck, had the rear door open, was already explaining before they reached him. She was in a rollover out on Route 9, mile marker 14. Car's probably fully involved by now. She was unconscious when I found her, had a head laceration. I didn't see any. I tried not to move her spine, but I had to pull her out. The car was about to... "Sir," a nurse, calm and fast, was already at his side. "We've got her. Step back." They moved with the efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. A gurney materialized. Hands reached in. Someone called out a blood pressure cuff. Someone else was already on a radio. Ethan stepped back. He stood on the sidewalk under the harsh emergency lights, his jacket torn, his forearm bleeding in 3 thin lines, his boots soaked through from the ditch. He watched them wheel her through the automatic doors. He watched the doors close. He stood there for a moment. Then he got back in his truck. A nurse, young, short hair, quick eyes, pushed back through the doors as he was reaching for the ignition. "Sir, wait. We need your name for the report. You're the one who brought her in?" Ethan looked at her. He looked at the doors. He looked at the clock on his dashboard. It was 9:47. Lucas would be awake, sitting up in bed in the dark, listening for headlights in the driveway. That's what that boy did. Had done it since he was 3 years old, and the habit had never broken. "She's going to be all right?" Ethan said. The nurse hesitated, the way people do when they don't want to promise what they can't guarantee. "We're going to take good care of her." He nodded. "She's going to need somebody with her," he said. "She was alone in that car. Make sure somebody's with her." "Sir, your name?" But he was already pulling out of the bay. He was on Route 9, heading home before she made it back inside. He didn't tell anyone about it. Not Mrs. Diaz, who met him at the door with one eyebrow raised and a look that said, "I'm not paid enough for this." Not his buddy Frank at the shop the next morning, who asked about the bandage on his arm and got a story about a cabinet door. Not even Lucas, who noticed everything, who had his mother's eyes and his father's tendency to watch people the way a careful person watches weather, and who asked over breakfast why Dad's jacket was in the trash. "It was old," Ethan said. "You've had it since before I was born," Lucas said. "That's what old means, bud." Lucas gave him the look, that specific 7-year-old look that said, "I don't entirely believe you, but I know you well enough to let it go for now." Then he went back to his cereal. Ethan sipped his coffee and watched his son and thought about a woman hanging upside down in a wrecked car on a foggy roadside, and how her chest had still been moving, and decided that was enough. The story was over. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't know it for 2 years. He'd been working at Calvert Mechanical since before Lucas was born. It was honest work, which was the main thing Ethan Cole required from a job. He was good with his hands, had been since his father put a wrench in them at age 9 and said a man who can fix things never goes hungry. And he was reliable in the way that only comes from having no backup plan and no safety net, and a child depending on you every single day. He showed up. He did the work. He went home. That was the shape of his life, and he'd long since made his peace with it. There had been a time, before Lucas, before Karen left, before the medical bills and the second mortgage, and the year where things got very, very tight, when Ethan had thought his life might take a different shape. He'd had plans once. College, maybe. Somewhere out west, away from this small blue-collar town with its 2-stoplight downtown and its diner that hadn't changed its menu since 1987. But Lucas came, and then Karen decided motherhood wasn't what she'd thought it would be, and she packed a bag on a Tuesday in March and drove away in her sister's car. And Ethan had stood in the kitchen holding a 2-year-old who was too young to understand and thinking, okay then. This is it. This is the life. And it was. And it was enough. Lucas was, the word that came to his mind most often, was careful. Not timid, not fearful exactly, but careful. A careful little boy who read every book twice before returning it to the library, who asked questions that Ethan didn't always know how to answer, who had a heart condition, mild, the doctor said, manageable, the kind of thing that required annual checkups and some dietary restrictions, and meant Ethan never let the boy out of his sight at a school playground, without knowing exactly which hospital was closest. Manageable. That word lived in Ethan's head like a tenant who paid his rent, but made too much noise. He managed. They both did. That was the life. The accident made the local news the next morning. A small item, half a column, buried on page 6. Single vehicle rollover, Route 9, no fatalities. Driver transported to Mercy General in critical condition. The woman's name, once it surfaced, meant nothing to Ethan. Victoria Ashford. He saw it, filed it, moved on. 3 weeks later, she was out of the ICU. 6 weeks after that, a reporter from the county paper ran a follow-up piece. Local heiress Victoria Ashford, 38, recovers from near-fatal accident. Family spokesperson confirms she is expected to regain partial mobility. Questions remain about the unidentified Good Samaritan who brought her to Mercy General. Ethan read it at the diner counter, between a coffee refill and a plate of eggs, Unidentified Good Samaritan. He thought, good. He left a $5 tip and drove to work. 6 months after the accident, a full-page ad ran in the county paper, then in the regional paper, then, apparently, online. Seeking the man who brought Victoria Ashford to Mercy General on the night of October 14th. If you have information, please contact the Ashford Family Foundation. A significant reward is being offered. Ethan saw it. He thought about it for about 30 seconds. Then he thought about what the word significant probably meant to a family with a foundation named after them. Then he thought about how a man takes a reward for doing what any decent person should have done in the first place, and whether that sits right, and whether he wanted the kind of life where it did sit right. He turned the page. He never came forward, not that month, not the next, not when the reward grew, not when the story went regional, briefly, and somebody on a local Facebook group posted a thread titled, "Who is the Route 9 Guardian Angel?" And 63 people commented, and Ethan's coworker Frank said, "Ain't that something?" And Ethan said, "Yeah," and drank his coffee. No one suspected him. Why would they? He was just a mechanic. A quiet man who drove a beat-up truck and fixed things, and raised his boy and didn't make a fuss. That was exactly who he was. And it was more than enough. The notice came on a Wednesday in February, 14 months after the accident. Lucas's annual cardiology appointment. Routine. The same office, the same doctor, the same waiting room with the outdated magazines and the fish tank in the corner that Lucas had been drawing pictures of since he was 4. Dr. Naran was good, patient, thorough, the kind of doctor who looked at the child instead of the chart. Ethan appreciated that. Except this time, Dr. Naran didn't look relaxed. He looked careful. "Ethan!" He sat down across from him in the small consultation room, and he set a folder on his knee, and he folded his hands on top of it. "I want to talk to you about what we're seeing in Lucas's latest imaging." Ethan had learned, over years of raising a child with a medical file, how to listen to doctors, how to hear the words without immediately flooding, how to stay in his body, keep his face still, breathe slowly, and actually process what was being said. "Okay," he said. "The HCM, the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, we've been monitoring since his diagnosis is progressing. It's not alarming progression, but it's no longer stable. The thickening in the septum has increased measurably since last year. We're seeing changes in the arrhythmia pattern that I'm not comfortable ignoring." Ethan's hands were very still on his knees. "What does that mean in practical terms?" Dr. Naran was quiet for a moment. "It means I'd like to refer him to the pediatric cardiac surgery team at Children's National. I want a second set of eyes on this, and I want to have an honest conversation about the surgical option. The septal myectomy." "Yes." A pause. "You've done your research." "I have a kid with a heart condition. Of course I've done my research." The doctor nodded, with something in his expression that was respect rather than sympathy, and Ethan was grateful for the distinction. "The surgery is highly effective," Dr. Naran said carefully. "The outcomes for pediatric patients are good, but it's a major open-heart procedure, and it's expensive," Ethan said. Silence. "How expensive?" The doctor looked at him steadily. "The full procedure, including the surgical team, anesthesia, post-operative ICU, recovery, and follow-up care, we're looking at somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000. The fish tank in the waiting room was doing something behind the wall. Ethan could hear the soft bubbling of the filter, faint through the drywall. Lucas would be out there right now, face 2 inches from the glass, watching those fish the way he watched everything. with that slow, patient attention that broke Ethan's heart sometimes. It was so pure. "And insurance," Ethan said. "Your plan would cover a portion. I've seen cases where they cover 60, 70%. But there will be a significant gap. Out-of-pocket, deductibles, the uncovered components. We're potentially looking at $50,000 to $80,000 out of pocket, even with your coverage." Ethan breathed. He breathed like a man who had learned to breathe through things. "He needs the surgery," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not today, not tomorrow. But I believe that within the next 12 to 18 months, yes, I think it becomes necessary." The doctor paused. "Ethan, there are resources. Financial assistance programs, charitable funds for pediatric cardiac care. I want to connect you with our financial counselor, and I want—" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Yeah, okay. Set that up." He stood. He shook the doctor's hand. He thanked him, because that was who he was. He walked out into the waiting room, and Lucas looked up from the fish tank. And Ethan looked at his son. Really looked at him. The way you look at someone when the world has just rearranged itself around the fact of them. And he smiled. "Good news," Ethan said. "Doc says you're doing great." Lucas tilted his head. That careful look. "You're lying." Ethan sat down beside him, looked at the fish. "Yeah," he said quietly. "A little." Lucas leaned against his father's arm. He was small for his age, slight-boned, big-eyed, serious in a way kids sometimes are when they've grown up watching a parent carry things silently. "Is it my heart?" Lucas asked. Ethan looked at him. "When'd you get so smart?" "Mom was smart," Lucas said simply. "You always said so." Ethan put his arm around his son, pulled him in, held him the way fathers hold children when they've been reminded how much is at stake. "We're going to be okay," he said. "You always say that." "Because it's always been true." Lucas thought about this. "So far," he said. Ethan laughed, a short, rough sound that surprised him. Lucas laughed too. And they sat there in that waiting room, father and son, watching the fish go about their small, uncomplicated lives, and the filter bubbled, and the fluorescent light hummed, and outside the window, the winter afternoon went on without them. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark and did the math over and over. The way you do when the math doesn't change, but you keep hoping it will if you arrange the numbers differently. He had $11,000 in savings. His truck was worth maybe $4,000 if he sold it and got lucky. His tools were good. He could sell those, though that would mean no income. He had some retirement, but cashing it out early meant penalties, taxes. He lay there and did the math, and the math said, not even close. He thought about the Ashford reward. He thought about it seriously for the first time, lying in the dark with his son asleep down the hall, and a number like $250,000 sitting in the middle of his chest like a stone. Then he thought about Karen. He thought about the day she left, and the way Lucas had looked at the door for 3 days afterward, waiting. He thought about what it meant to be a father. Not the Hallmark version, not the simple version, but the real version. The one where your job is to give a child something solid to stand on, so that when the world knocks them sideways, they don't go all the way down. If he took that reward now, 2 years later, anonymously, for something he'd done without a second thought, no, not because of pride, not because he was foolish, but because there was a version of him that Lucas was watching every single day. And that version of him didn't take money for doing what was right. He'd find another way. He'd find 12 other ways if he had to. That was the job. He was coming out of the grocery store on a Saturday morning in early March when he saw her for the first time. The second time. He didn't know that yet. And his first thought had nothing to do with recognition or fate. His first thought was, she dropped her bag. A woman in a wheelchair at the base of the ramp, paper grocery bags split open on the sidewalk, apples and a box of pasta and one very sad head of lettuce scattered across the concrete. She was reaching for the nearest apple with the expression of someone attempting to solve a problem through sheer determination and not quite winning. Ethan was beside her before the last apple had stopped rolling. "Here," he said. He crouched, started gathering. "I've got it." "I've got it," she said. Her voice was, he noticed it immediately, very controlled. The voice of someone who had trained themselves to sound fine, regardless of circumstance. "I'm sure you do," he said. "I'm just faster." She looked at him sharply. He looked back, mild and straightforward, the way he looked at most things. "The lettuce is probably done," he said, standing, holding the reconstructed bag. "But everything else made it." She studied him. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and an angular face that would have been striking even without the expression on it, which was a complicated mixture of reluctance, assessment, and something underneath both that he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "It's 3 minutes out of my Saturday," he said. She blinked, like that was an unexpected thing for a person to say. He handed her the bag. She took it with both hands, positioned it on her lap. "Are you parked close?" he asked. "I have a car." "I know. Is it close?" Another pause. "Third row." "Okay." He put one hand loosely on the handle of her wheelchair. Waited. "Is that all right?" She looked at the hand, at him. And then something in her face did a small, complicated thing. Shifted, softened, almost against her will. And she said, quietly, "Yes." He walked her to her car. He loaded her grocery bag into the passenger seat when she opened the door. He stepped back. "I'm Ethan," he said, because it seemed like the thing to say. She hesitated. "Claire," she said. He nodded. "Have a good Saturday, Claire." He walked back to his truck. He didn't think about her again until he was halfway home, and something small and inexplicable made him glance once in the rearview mirror. She was still in the parking lot, sitting in her car, watching him go. He had no idea who she was. She had been searching for him for 22 months. And the moment she saw him crouch down in a parking lot to pick up a stranger's scattered groceries, no hesitation, no calculation, just a man who saw a problem and moved toward it. She understood, for the very first time, exactly what she had been looking for. Which was also the moment she decided to lie to him. And everything that followed was the consequence of that one decision. Everything. She came back the following Saturday. Ethan was loading a bag of dog food into his truck. He didn't own a dog. It was for Mrs. Diaz's ancient beagle, which was another story entirely. When he heard wheels on pavement and looked up and saw the same woman from the week before, moving through the parking lot with the same careful, controlled posture and the same expression that said, "I am completely fine and I don't need anything from anyone." He said, "No groceries this time?" She stopped, looked at him, like she hadn't expected him to remember her. "I'm being more careful with my bags," she said. "Smart." He hoisted the dog food into the truck bed. "You live around here?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "Close enough," she said. He noticed the pause. He was the kind of man who noticed things without making a production of it. But he just nodded and said, "Good area," and closed the tailgate. She was still there when he turned around. "You always do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Just..." She seemed to search for the word. "Help, without being asked." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to tell me most people don't?" Most people don't. Then most people are missing out, he said. It's not complicated. Somebody needs a hand. You've got two. That's math, not heroics. She looked at him with that same expression as the week before. The complicated one. The one that had something underneath the surface that he couldn't quite get to. Then she almost smiled. Almost. Ethan, she said, like she was testing the weight of the name. Claire, he said back. That almost smile again. Then she moved on through the parking lot, and he watched her go for a second before getting in his truck, and he thought, interesting woman. And then he thought about the grocery list, and whether Lucas had remembered to add orange juice, and he drove home. But she had not come to that parking lot by accident. She had driven 40 minutes from the other side of the county, past 6 perfectly adequate grocery stores, because a private investigator she'd hired 8 months after the accident had finally, after 22 months of searching, put a name to a blue Ford pickup and a terse ER nurse's description. White male, late 30s, brown hair. Said she was going to need somebody with her. Drove off before I got his full name. Something Cole, maybe. Something Cole. Ethan Cole. Calvert Mechanical. 1 son, 7 years old. No record. No debt other than a modest mortgage on a rental house on Birch Street. She had read the file 3 times. She had told herself she only wanted to see him. To understand, to answer the question that had lived in her chest for nearly 2 years. Why? Why had he stopped? Why had he stayed? Why had he walked away? In her world, in the world of boardrooms and acquisitions and people who did things because of what they expected to receive in return, a man who pulled a stranger out of a burning car and then vanished without leaving a name was not just unusual. He was incomprehensible. She needed to comprehend him. That was all. At least, that was what she told herself in the 40-minute drive to his grocery store. She had not planned to speak to him, but then he was just there, crouching in the parking lot, gathering her scattered groceries without any trace of performance or expectation, and he'd looked up at her with those steady, undramatic eyes and said, "I'm just faster." And something had happened in her chest that she did not have clean language for. So she had given him a false name. She had told herself it was temporary, just until she understood what she was dealing with. Just until she knew whether this man was real or whether she was projecting something onto a stranger because she'd been unconscious for 9 days and woken up changed and had been looking for an explanation ever since. She told herself that for 3 more Saturdays. And then she met Lucas. It was the 4th Saturday, and she had stopped pretending, even to herself, that she was there by coincidence. She was parked near the entrance when Ethan pulled in, and this time there was a boy in the passenger seat, slight-boned and large-eyed, who climbed out of the truck and immediately looked directly at her, with an expression of open, uncalculating assessment that made her breath catch. He looked like his father. Same steady gaze, same stillness. "That's my son," Ethan said, appearing beside her. "Lucas, this is Claire. She has bad luck with grocery bags." "I've heard about bad luck," Lucas said seriously. "Dad says it's not real. It's just patterns you haven't figured out yet." Victoria looked at the 7-year-old child. "Your dad sounds like he knows what he's talking about." "Sometimes," Lucas said. He tilted his head. "What happened to your legs?" "Lucas," Ethan started. "It's okay," Victoria said. She looked at the boy directly, the way children deserve to be looked at. "I was in an accident. My spine was hurt. The wheelchair helps me get around." Lucas considered this with the seriousness of a small engineer examining a problem. "Does it hurt?" "Not much anymore." "Does it bother you when people ask about it?" "It used to," she said. "You're pretty direct for your age." Dad says it's better to ask than to assume, Lucas said. He says assuming is how people get into trouble. He's right about that too, she said. And she looked up at Ethan, who was watching his son with the particular expression of a parent who is simultaneously proud and slightly exhausted. And something about that expression, the unguarded love in it, the tiredness that was just part of the territory and not a complaint, made her look away. "We're getting groceries," Lucas announced. "You can come if you want." "Lucas," Ethan said, with a note that suggested they'd had some version of a conversation about inviting strangers to things. "She's not a stranger," Lucas said. "You already know her name." Ethan looked at Victoria. Something wry and helpless moved across his face. "He does this," he said. "I can see that," she said. And she heard her own voice, softer than she intended. And she made a decision she would later be unable to fully justify. "I don't mind," she said, "if that's all right." So she went grocery shopping with them. And that was how it began. Not with strategy, not with her careful plan to observe and understand and maintain her distance, but with a 7-year-old boy who didn't believe in strangers, and a paper bag full of ordinary groceries, and an afternoon that moved at a pace she had not allowed herself in years. Lucas walked beside her wheelchair through the cereal aisle and asked her 17 questions about various boxes with the focused intensity of a researcher, and she answered each one with complete seriousness. And Ethan walked behind them both and didn't say much, but watched with those quiet, attentive eyes that she was beginning to understand, saw considerably more than they let on. At checkout, Lucas said, "We have to get the good apples. Dad got the wrong ones last time." "I got the ones that were on sale," Ethan said. "They were mealy." "They were fine." "They were mealy," Lucas said, with the certainty of someone who has thought about this extensively. He turned to Victoria. "Don't you think people should always get the good apples, even if they're more expensive?" "I think," she said carefully, "that's a more complicated question than it sounds." Lucas looked at her with new respect. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I think too." Ethan looked at her over his son's head, and this time the expression on his face was different. Not the mild, surface-level friendliness of the parking lot, but something that looked at her more directly, as if Lucas had just offered him some information about her that he was still in the process of evaluating. She looked away first. She paid for her own groceries. Ethan didn't offer to pay, which she appreciated more than she could easily explain. He held the door. She went through it. Lucas bounced between them on the sidewalk, talking about something at school, a science project involving vinegar and baking soda that had apparently achieved results beyond what was strictly expected. "Beyond expected how?" Ethan asked. "Mrs. Patterson said it was, quote, an incident, unquote," Lucas said, with considerable satisfaction. At the truck, Lucas turned to Victoria with the directness that was apparently simply his nature. "Are you going to be here next Saturday?" "Lucas," Ethan said. "Probably," Victoria said. Lucas nodded like this was settled. "Good. I want to tell you how the science project ends. Dad doesn't ask the right questions." "I asked plenty of questions," Ethan said. "You asked if anything caught fire," Lucas said. "That's only one question." Ethan opened the passenger door and gave his son a look. Lucas got in, still talking. Ethan closed the door and turned back to Victoria, and for a moment they were just two adults on the sidewalk, and he looked at her with that steady, evaluating look and said, quietly enough that Lucas couldn't hear, "He doesn't do this with everyone." "Do what?" "Decide on people," Ethan said. "He's careful. He takes his time. But when he decides..." He paused. "Just wanted you to know, in case it matters." She didn't know what to say. She had prepared for many versions of this man. She had not prepared for this version. "It matters," she said. He nodded, got in the truck, drove away. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time. She thought about her name, his name, the accident, the file her investigator had assembled. She thought about the woman she'd been before the crash, fast and decisive, and armored in a way she'd always considered strength, and the woman she'd become after, slower and more careful and raw in places she hadn't known existed. She thought about a man who had pulled her out of a burning car, said, "You're safe now," and walked away without asking for a single thing in return. And then she took out her phone and called the one person who knew the full truth of what she was doing. "Tell me this is still a good idea," she said. Her assistant, Marcus, was quiet for a moment. He'd been with her for 6 years. He knew when to be honest. "It was never a good idea," he said. "You know that." "I know." "Then why are you calling me?" "Because I spent an hour grocery shopping with him and his son," she said. "And it was the most—" She stopped. "I don't have the word for it." "Normal?" Marcus offered. She was quiet. "Yeah," she said. "Normal." Another pause. "Victoria, I know," she said. "I know." She looked at the windshield. "It's just, he doesn't perform anything. He's just there, in this completely unperformed way, like someone who has nothing to prove to anyone, including himself." "That's either the most genuine person you've ever met," Marcus said carefully, "or it's going to hurt a lot when this falls apart." "It's not going to—" She stopped herself. "I'm just observing." "You're grocery shopping with them." "I'm observing in a grocery store." "Victoria." She didn't answer. "Whatever you're doing," Marcus said, "be careful. He has a kid." "I know he has a kid." "A kid who is apparently deciding on you. Those are your words." She closed her eyes. "I know." She drove home through 40 minutes of flat farmland and bare winter trees, and she told herself she was in control of the situation, and she was not foolish enough to fully believe it, but she wasn't ready to stop yet either. She came back the next Saturday, and the one after that, and somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th, the line between observing and simply being there blurred in a way she stopped trying to track. She learned that Ethan took his coffee with 1 sugar and got visibly irritated at self-checkout machines in a way he found slightly embarrassing. She learned that Lucas was reading 3 grade levels above where he should be, and had opinions about the library's fiction section that his teacher described as spirited. She learned that Ethan coached Lucas's reading by letting the boy correct him whenever he stumbled over a word, because some smart person had told him that teaching was the best way to learn, and he'd decided that applied to 8-year-olds too. She learned these things because she was paying attention, and because both of them, in different ways, for different reasons, let her. Lucas decided on her completely and without reservation, the way children decide on the people they trust, with a totality that adults have usually learned to ration. He saved things to tell her, not just the science project, though that story grew and ramified across 3 Saturdays into something that apparently involved a strongly worded note from the principal. But things he was reading, questions he was turning over, observations about the world that he didn't always have the right audience for. "Dad's good at practical stuff," he explained to her once, with a matter-of-fact precision of someone conducting an assessment. "But he sometimes doesn't know what to do with the philosophical stuff." "What's an example of philosophical stuff?" she asked. Lucas thought about it. "I asked him once whether it's better to do something good if nobody knows about it. Like, is it still good?" Something tightened in her chest. "What did he say?" "He said yes. Obviously yes. He said the point of doing something good isn't so other people know you did it. He said the point is just that it gets done." Lucas paused. "But then I asked him, doesn't it matter that you know? Like, Doesn't knowing you did the right thing mean something to you, personally?" And he didn't answer for a long time. What did he finally say? He said, Lucas frowned, remembering carefully. He said it's not about how you feel afterward. It's about what you do in the moment when nobody's watching. That's who you actually are. She looked at this boy. She thought about a foggy roadside, a man who hadn't given his name. "Your dad is right," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Lucas nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "He usually is," he said. "It's annoying sometimes." She laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh, and the realness of it surprised her. Surprised them both, apparently, because Lucas looked pleased in the way children look pleased when they've gotten a genuine reaction out of a grown-up, rather than a managed one. Ethan, from across the table, watched her laugh. They were at the diner on a Saturday afternoon, the three of them, which had evolved from parking lot encounters by a logic that none of them had explicitly agreed to, but all of them had allowed. The diner with the menu that hadn't changed since 1987, and the coffee that Ethan said was the second best thing about the town. The first being the library, because Lucas had made him say that. She had ordered pie. Lucas had interrogated the waitress about the filling. Ethan had gotten the coffee and watched his son conduct this interrogation with the same expression she was learning to read. Proud, tired, and so completely in love with this kid that it came off him like heat. She was falling into this. She knew it. She had known it for at least 3 Saturdays, and she had not stopped it. And Marcus had stopped asking pointed questions because she'd stopped answering them. And she was aware, with the precise, unflinching part of herself that had built a company from the ground up, that this situation had a shape, and the shape of it was moving towards something she was not prepared for. Because there was a thing she had not done. She had not told Ethan who she was. She was to him, Claire. Last name never given, life details offered sparingly. A woman in a wheelchair who had bad luck with grocery bags and knew something about philosophy, and had somehow become a fixture of his Saturday mornings without anyone formally deciding that was what was happening. And every time she thought about telling him the truth, she thought about his face, that steady, unperformed, completely genuine face. She thought about what it would look like when the trust in it became something else. She told herself she would tell him soon. Next week. After the holidays. In the spring, when the timing was better. She told herself a lot of things. Then, on a Thursday in April, Ethan called her. She had given him her number 3 weeks earlier. Or rather, she had given him a number that forwarded to a phone she kept specifically for this, because she had been careful. She had been meticulous. And he had texted twice before. Short, practical things about timing and whether Lucas had left a book in her car. This was different. She answered on the second ring. "Hey." His voice was off. Not panicked. Ethan didn't panic. But there was something underneath the evenness that she had not heard before. "I'm sorry to call like this. I know it's late." "It's fine. What's wrong?" A pause. "Lucas had an episode today. His heart. He's okay. He's home. The doctor said it wasn't an event, just an arrhythmia, but..." Another pause. Longer. The kind that a man takes when he is deciding how much to let show. "It was bad, Claire. It scared him. It scared me." She sat up straight. "What do you need?" "Nothing. I'm not calling because I need anything. I just..." He exhaled. It was a rough sound. "Lucas asked about you. He wanted to know if you were going to be at the diner Saturday. I told him yes because I assumed..." He stopped. "I shouldn't have assumed. I'm sorry." "I'll be there Saturday," she said immediately. "You don't have to..." "Ethan." Her voice was firm and quiet. And she said his name the way you say someone's name when you want them to actually hear you. I'll be there. Tell him I'll be there. Silence. Then, okay. A breath. Thank you. Don't thank me. Claire, just... She paused, softer. Tell him I'm bringing the good apples. A brief silence, and then Ethan Cole, who did not perform anything and had nothing to prove to anyone, made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely. Yeah, he said. Okay. She sat with a phone in her lap for a long time after he hung up. The name she had given him was wrong. The life she had sketched was incomplete. The entire architecture of how they had met was a construction she had built on top of a truth she had never spoken. And his son had asked for her by name, the name that wasn't hers. She thought about what Lucas had said at the diner, about his father's belief that who you actually are is what you do in the moment when nobody's watching. She thought about a man who had dragged her out of a car and disappeared into the dark without asking for a credit. She thought about what she was doing. And for the first time since she had driven 40 minutes to a parking lot with a false name on her lips and a story she'd half convinced herself wasn't really a lie, Victoria Ashford was genuinely, deeply afraid. Not of exposure, not of consequence, of what she was becoming in the space between who she was and who he thought she was, and of how much, God help her, she did not want to lose it. She brought the good apples, 2 bags of them, the expensive kind from the produce stand on Route 7, the ones with the thin skin and the snap when you bit into them that Lucas had described once with the seriousness of a food critic and the vocabulary of an 8-year-old. She set them on the diner table without ceremony, and Lucas looked at them and then looked at her, and something in his face relaxed in a way that told her the week had been hard and he hadn't wanted to say so. You came, he said. I said I would. People say things, Lucas said, with a particular flatness of a child who has learned this the specific, irreversible way. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at him steadily. I came, she said. Lucas picked up an apple, turned it over in his hands, nodded, like this was data he was logging somewhere important. Then he looked up at his father, who was sliding into the booth across from her, and something passed between them. A small, private look. The shorthand of 2 people who have been alone together long enough to develop their own language. Ethan looked at her over his son's head. Thank you, he said quietly. Stop thanking me, she said. It's a habit. Break it. He almost smiled. He picked up the menu he already knew by heart, and the morning started, and she let herself settle into it the way she'd been settling into these Saturdays for months now. Carefully at first, and then, as the weeks accumulated, with less and less caution, until sitting in this booth with these 2 people felt less like something she was doing and more like somewhere she simply was. That was the problem. That was the specific, growing, impossible problem. The lie had a shape in the beginning. It was contained. She was Claire, a woman with no last name and a vague professional life she deflected questions about with the skill of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms where deflection was a form of currency. She had a wheelchair and dark eyes, and she showed up on Saturdays, and she was, she told herself, just observing. But you cannot observe a child who saves things to tell you. You cannot maintain clinical distance from a man who calls you on a Thursday night because his son had a scare, and the boy asked for you by name. You cannot keep inventory on your own feelings when they stop cooperating with the inventory system entirely. It was April. They had been doing this since January. Longer if you counted the parking lot encounters that she had engineered and he had simply accepted, the way he seemed to accept most things, with straightforward, unfussy openness, no interrogation, no performance, just the uncomplicated willingness to let something be what it appeared to be. She had stopped deserving that willingness approximately 3 months ago. Lucas ate his apple and told her about his teacher and a disagreement that had apparently been developing over the correct interpretation of a short story they'd read in class. The argument was detailed and ongoing, and Lucas had clearly been waiting to present it to her specifically because, as he'd mentioned once without apparent self-consciousness, she asked the right questions. "Mrs. Patterson says the ending is hopeful," Lucas said. "But it's not hopeful. It's just, the bad thing didn't get worse. That's not the same as hopeful." "What's the difference?" Victoria asked. "Hope is when you believe something good is coming. Not worse is just surviving." He frowned. "Right?" She thought about a hospital room. 9 days of it. Waking up to a body that no longer worked the way it had. Learning the difference between going to be fine and going to be different, permanently. And that's what fine is now. "You're right," she said. "They're not the same." "See?" Lucas said to no one in particular. "I'm not taking sides," Ethan said. "You took my side. I stayed quiet. That's not the same as taking sides." "It kind of is," Lucas said. Ethan looked at Victoria. "Do you see what I live with?" "I think it's great," she said. "You would," he said. But he was smiling, and the smile was the real one, not the polite surface version, but the one that reached the corners of his eyes and made him look, just briefly, like a man with nothing to carry. She had catalogued that smile without intending to. She knew exactly how rarely it appeared and what it cost him to let it. She looked at her coffee cup. She thought, tell him today. She did not tell him that day. What happened instead was this. After the diner, in the parking lot, Lucas asked if she wanted to come see the backyard project he'd been describing for 2 weeks. A birdhouse he was building with his father. Complicated by Lucas's insistence on structural accuracy that had apparently led to several debates about load-bearing walls as they applied to songbirds. She said yes before she'd decided to say yes. Ethan glanced at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not reluctance, not exactly eagerness either. Something more careful than both. "It's not far," he said. "I know," she said, and then heard what she'd said. "I mean, you've mentioned the neighborhood." He looked at her for a half-second longer than necessary. "Yeah," he said. "I have." She followed them home in her car. It was the first time she had seen the house in person rather than on a satellite image in a private investigator's file. And the difference between those two versions of the same address was the difference between data and reality. The reality was small and well kept and entirely without pretension, with a front porch that had 2 chairs on it and a yard that was just slightly too ambitious for one person to maintain perfectly. And it looked like what it was, a place where someone was trying hard and doing well enough and calling it home. Lucas showed her the birdhouse frame, which was propped on the back porch with a confidence that did not entirely match its structural integrity. He explained the design with technical vocabulary he'd apparently acquired from a library book, and then cross-referenced online. Victoria asked questions. Ethan handed her a coffee and leaned in the doorway and watched his son hold court with the quiet, deliberate pride of a man watching something he built. Not the birdhouse, the boy, become itself. She stayed for 3 hours. She hadn't planned to stay for 3 hours, but Lucas had segued from the birdhouse to the book he was reading, and then Ethan had heated up leftover soup because it was that kind of afternoon. Cool and overcast, and the kind of weather that makes a warm kitchen feel specifically important. And she had sat at the kitchen table while Lucas read aloud from the chapter he was on, because he said she needed context for a theory he was developing. And at some point she looked up, and it was nearly 4 o'clock, and she had been in this house for 3 hours, and it had felt like 20 minutes. Ethan walked her to her car. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch with the book on his chest. Something that happened, Ethan said quietly, when he'd been anxious and was finally safe enough to drop his guard. She looked at the boy through the screen door, at his slight chest rising and falling, at the book. "He's something," she said. "Yeah," Ethan's voice was soft. "He is." They stood on the front porch. The afternoon was cooling. She should leave. She had a board call in the morning, and a stack of documents her actual assistant had been forwarding to the private phone all week that she hadn't looked at because she'd been thinking about good apples and a cardiac episode and a boy who saved things to tell her. "Claire," Ethan said. Something about the way he said it. Not uncertain. Deliberate. She looked at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know I'm not asking because I need an answer right now. But I'm also not the kind of person who doesn't say things when he should." Her chest tightened. "Okay." He paused. "Not struggling exactly. Choosing. You're important to him. You've become important to him in a real way. And that matters to me more than most things." He looked at her directly. "So I want to know if you're going to be around. Not as an accusation, just as information. Because he's been through people leaving, and He stopped. "I'm careful about who I let close to him." She felt the weight of it land exactly where he'd intended it to land. Not heavy-handed, not manipulative, just the plain, unadorned truth of a father who had been taking careful inventory of the risk this Saturday morning woman represented to his son's heart. She thought about what she was, who she was, the name she'd given him, and the name she hadn't. The foundation she ran with its 47 employees and its 9-figure endowment. The board that was currently waiting on 3 decisions she hadn't made because she was standing on a porch in a working-class neighborhood thinking about birdhouses. She should tell him right now, this moment. This exact opening, offered without agenda, was the moment to tell him the truth and let it fall where it fell. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. She heard herself say it. She meant it completely. She also knew what she had not said, and the gap between the two things was wider than she'd ever allowed herself to fully measure before this moment. Ethan looked at her. He nodded, and then, quietly, he said, "Good." Just that. Just the word, without decoration or condition. She drove home. She called Marcus from the car. "I need to tell him," she said, without preamble. Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Yes," he said. "You do." "I'm going to tell him Saturday." "You said that last Saturday." "I mean it this time." "Victoria," his voice was careful. "The longer this goes, the worse the landing. You know that." "I know." "He's going to feel manipulated, regardless of your intentions, and I know your intentions. He's going to look back at every conversation you've had and wonder what was real." "All of it was real," she said. "Everything I said was real. My name was the only thing that wasn't." "Your name is the most fundamental thing," Marcus said gently. "It's the thing everything else rests on." She drove in silence for a while. "He pulled me out of a burning car," she said, "and then he walked away. He didn't want anything. He just did it. And then I came back and I built an entire—" She pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes. "I built a relationship on a lie, because I was afraid that if he knew who I was, he'd treat me like everyone else treats me. Like I'm a transaction waiting to happen." "I know," Marcus said. "And now his son is in love with a woman who doesn't exist." "Also true." "Marcus, I don't know how to fix this." "You tell the truth," he said. "That's all. You tell it, and you take what comes, and you don't try to manage the outcome. That's the only version of this that has any chance. She heard him. She heard every word. She didn't tell him the next Saturday. What happened instead was that Lucas had a good week, a genuinely, visibly good week, the kind that arrived sometimes without warning and felt like a gift. And he was bright and talkative and full of the science project sequel, which had evolved into what he called Phase 2, and which Ethan had clearly been told about and had concerns regarding. The morning moved fast and warm and easy, and she kept finding reasons. Just one more hour, just this conversation, just until Lucas finishes the story, to stay in the light of it a little longer. She told herself she would tell him the following week. She had been telling herself this for 3 weeks. The truth came out on a Thursday. Not on her terms, not in the careful, prepared conversation she had been rehearsing and postponing. On a Thursday afternoon, from a direction she hadn't anticipated. Ethan's coworker Frank had a sister-in-law who worked at a law firm in the city, and that firm did contract work for the Ashford Family Foundation. And somewhere in the chain between Frank and his sister-in-law and a charity gala announcement that had gone out to a regional mailing list that same week, there was a photograph. Victoria Ashford, the announcement read, founder and chair, Ashford Family Foundation. Annual benefit dinner, May 12th. Below the text, a professional photograph. Boardroom posture, controlled expression, the chair visible at the edge of the frame. Frank had shown Ethan the announcement on his phone because Ethan did occasional repair work on the building that housed one of the Ashford Foundation's satellite offices, and Frank thought maybe they could get a contract out of it. He'd shown him the photo to confirm he was thinking of the right organization. Ethan had looked at the photograph for a long time. Dark hair, dark eyes, that angular, striking face, that controlled expression with something underneath it that he'd spent 4 months learning to read without being able to name. He didn't say anything to Frank. He drove home. He made Lucas dinner. He helped with homework. He said goodnight the same way he always said it, the same routine, the same words, because Lucas was perceptive and sensitive, and Ethan had spent 8 years learning how to keep his outside from broadcasting his inside when the timing wasn't right. After Lucas was asleep, Ethan sat in the kitchen for a long time. He wasn't angry, not yet. Or maybe he was angry in a form he didn't recognize, something cold and still rather than hot. The kind of feeling that comes not from being surprised, but from understanding, all at once, how many small moments you'd interpreted correctly, and how many you'd let yourself misread. She has a car with hand controls for someone who couldn't use their feet. Not a standard modification, a vehicle you ordered specifically. Close enough. When he'd asked where she lived, he'd let that go. The half-second pause before she said her name, he'd let that go too. He'd let a lot go. He'd told himself it was because he wasn't the kind of person who interrogated people who hadn't offered information. He'd told himself it was respect for her privacy. And it was those things. But it was also that he hadn't wanted to look directly at the shape of it. Because the shape of it, looked at directly, had a particular outline that a man like Ethan Cole, who had nothing to offer a woman like that and knew it, would have found a reason to walk away from. And he hadn't wanted to walk away. That was the part that sat in his chest the heaviest. Not that she'd lied, not the name or the omission or the careful deflections, but that he had looked at something and chosen not to look too hard, because he'd wanted it to be what it appeared to be, just a woman. Just a woman with dark eyes and a real laugh and a son she treated like he was worth taking seriously. Just a person, not Victoria Ashford. Not the woman whose name had been in the county paper 2 years ago when he'd turned the page. Not the woman who had a foundation and a benefit dinner and a legal team. Not the woman he had carried out of a burning car on a foggy October night. He stopped. He sat very still. He thought about her face, that first day in the parking lot. The way she'd looked at him. Not the way you look at a stranger. The way you look at someone you've been trying to find. He thought about everything. He took his time with it. He was thorough. Then he got up, rinsed his coffee cup, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He didn't call her that night. He didn't call her the next day, though his phone was there and her number was in it, and he picked it up twice and set it back down both times. He needed to know what he was going to say before he said it, because he was the kind of man who did not say things he wasn't ready to mean. By the time Saturday morning came, he knew. She arrived at the diner at 9, which was when she always arrived, and she was 2 minutes early, which she always was, and she smiled when she came through the door and saw Lucas already in the booth with his notebook open to a page that presumably contained agenda items, because that was the kind of child he was. Ethan waited. He watched her settle in. He watched her and Lucas move into their routine. The notebook, the questions, the back and forth that had its own rhythm now, established over months. He watched his son lean across the table to show her something. And he watched her lean in to look. And he watched the expression on her face, open and present and genuine in every way that he had always believed it to be. And he felt the thing in his chest pull in 2 directions at once. Then Lucas went to the counter to ask the waitress about the pie options, which he did every Saturday with full sincerity, despite knowing the answer. And Ethan looked at her across the table and said, quietly and without preamble, "I know who you are." The color left her face, not gradually, all at once. She went very still. Her hands, on the table, did not move. She looked at him with those dark eyes, and whatever she'd been about to say, if she'd been about to say anything, didn't come. She just looked at him. And in her face was the thing she'd been keeping underneath everything else all this time. Not guilt, exactly. Not fear. Something more complicated. Something that looked, stripped of all its management and control, like someone who had been waiting for the floor to fall out, and was both relieved and devastated that it finally had. "Victoria," he said. One word. Her actual name. And something in her face broke completely open when she heard it. Lucas was coming back from the counter. Ethan looked at his son, at his slight, bright, careful boy, who had decided on this woman with a totality that he gave to very few people, who had saved things to tell her, who asked for her by name when he was scared. And he felt the full weight of what was happening with a clarity that was almost physical. "Not here," he said, low and controlled. "Not in front of him." She nodded. Her eyes were wet, and she was not letting them spill, holding it together with the same discipline she applied to everything, the control that was the one constant, whether her name was Claire or Victoria or anything else. Lucas arrived back at the table with a report on the pie situation. The morning continued. Ethan drank his coffee. He answered when Lucas spoke. He was present and steady in the way that cost him, that morning, considerably more than it usually did. And across the table, Victoria Ashford sat with her hands in her lap, and her real name finally in the room between them. And she understood, with the same precise, unflinching clarity that had built her everything, that she was about to lose the only thing she hadn't known she needed until she already couldn't imagine being without it. Lucas ordered the apple pie. He always ordered the apple pie. But this Saturday, he announced it with particular satisfaction, as if the decision were the result of careful deliberation, rather than foregone conclusion. And the waitress wrote it down with the patience of a woman who had been writing it down for months. Ethan ordered coffee. Victoria ordered nothing, and when the waitress looked at her, she said, "Just water, thank you," in a voice that was so precisely controlled, It could have passed for normal if you weren't paying attention. Ethan was paying attention. He watched her across the table for the rest of that hour, the way you watch something you haven't fully decided what to do with yet. Not with hostility, not with coldness, but with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who had been surprised and was taking his time about it. He answered Lucas. He drank his coffee. He did the things the morning required of him, because the morning required them, and Lucas was there, and Lucas deserved a Saturday that didn't carry the weight of what was sitting between the two adults at the table. Lucas noticed anyway. He noticed because he always noticed, and because the specific texture of the silence between his father and Claire was different from the usual silence, which was comfortable and familiar, and said, "We are people who don't need to fill every moment with noise." This silence had a different quality. He looked between them twice and didn't ask, which meant he was cataloging it for later, which was exactly what his father did. And the similarity was both accurate and, at this moment, inconvenient. When Lucas excused himself for the bathroom, Ethan said, without looking up from his cup, "I'll drive him home and come back. We can talk in the parking lot." "Ethan, not here," he said, same as before, quiet, flat, final. She was quiet. Then, "Okay." He drove Lucas home. Lucas, in the passenger seat, lasted approximately 90 seconds before he said, "Did something happen?" "I need to handle something," Ethan said. "I'll be back in an hour." "With Claire?" He glanced at his son. "Yeah." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she okay?" Ethan thought about how to answer that. "I don't know yet," he said. Lucas looked out the window. "She seemed sad," he said. "Like the careful kind of sad. The kind where you're trying not to be, but it's happening anyway." Ethan drove. "Is it bad?" Lucas asked. "I don't know yet," he said again. And it was the truth. And it was the only answer he had. And he left Lucas with Mrs. Diaz and drove back to the diner. And Victoria was in the parking lot where she'd said she'd be. Her car pulled up to the far end, away from the entrance, and she was sitting with her window down and both hands on the wheel, like she was braced for something. He pulled up alongside her and got out and stood by her door. And the morning was cool, and the lot was mostly empty, and there was no version of this that wasn't hard, so he didn't look for one. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice was steady, the kind of steady that costs. "Since Thursday." She closed her eyes, opened them. "How?" "A photograph. Charity gala announcement. My coworkers connected to the building your foundation uses." He paused. "It wasn't hard, once I knew the name." "I was going to tell you," she said. "I know. I mean it. I kept finding reasons not to, and I know what that sounds like, but I was going to." "Victoria." He said it the same way he'd said it at the diner. Not hard, not cold. Just her name, her real one, placed between them like something that had to be acknowledged before anything else could happen. "I believe you were going to tell me. That's not actually the question." She looked up at him. "Then what is?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the asphalt, then back at her. "Why did you come back?" he said. "Not to the diner, not to the parking lot. I mean, why did you come back at all? You knew who I was. I didn't know who you were. You had every advantage in that situation, and you used it. So I want to understand what you were doing." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought she might not answer, and he'd have to decide what to do with the silence. But then she said, very carefully, "You saved my life, and you walked away. You didn't give your name. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't—" She stopped. I needed to understand why. That's it? That was the beginning, she said. And her voice changed, became less controlled, more exposed, like something coming apart at a seam. I told myself that's all it was. I hired an investigator. I found your name. I thought I'd see you once, just understand what I was dealing with. And then you picked up my groceries, and you said it was just math, not heroics. And she pressed her lips together. I gave you the wrong name because I was afraid. Of what? Of what I am to people. She said it directly, without self-pity, the way you state facts about a condition you've come to terms with. I am a transaction to almost everyone I meet. I have been since I was 24 years old, and people started understanding what my family's name was worth. Everyone wants something. Everyone manages me. And you, she looked at him, you treated me like a person, like a completely ordinary person with no value beyond being a person who needed a hand with a grocery bag. And I knew that would stop the moment you knew who I was. Ethan said nothing. So I kept the name, she said. And I told myself it was temporary. And then, Lucas. Her voice broke slightly on his name, and she caught it, held it, kept going. Lucas didn't give me any room to be a transaction. He just decided on me. And I let him, and I let you. And I should have told you the truth 3 months ago, and I didn't. And I know there's no version of that I can defend. Ethan looked at her for a long time. The accident, he said. Route 9, October 14th, 2 years ago. She met his eyes, and he watched it happen, watched the recognition, the arrival of something she had been holding separately and now couldn't anymore, move through her face. Yes, she said. You knew that was me. From the first day in the parking lot. She didn't look away. I recognized your truck. And then you. And yes, I knew. He turned away from her, walked a few steps toward the front of his truck, stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at the middle distance for a moment. She didn't say anything. She gave him that, at least, the space to be with it, without her filling it. He turned back. I have a son, he said. He is 8 years old, and he has a heart condition, and he has already lost one person who was supposed to stay, his mother, who also had reasons that made sense to her. His voice was controlled and even, and it cost him visibly. And I let you in. I watched him decide on you, and I let it happen because I thought... He stopped. I was careful about you. I was paying attention, and I still didn't see it. Ethan, I'm not finished. Not harsh, just clear. He asked for you by name when he was scared. A 9-year-old boy called you by name when his heart did something frightening. That's not nothing. That's not something I can walk back. And it happened because I didn't ask the right questions, and you didn't answer the ones I didn't ask. I know, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I know exactly what I did. I'm not asking you to... I'm not here to manage this. I just need you to know that everything that happened between us was real. Every conversation, every Saturday. I was never performing anything. The name was wrong. Nothing else was. He looked at her. What did you want? He said. In the end. What was the plan? There wasn't a plan, she said. That was the problem. I stopped having a plan around week 3, and I never built another one because I didn't want one. I just wanted... She stopped again, and this time what came through was not the controlled, composed version, but the actual one, unguarded in a way he suspected she rarely allowed herself to be with anyone. I wanted to keep having Saturdays, she said simply. That's all. I just wanted to keep having them. The mornings sat around them. A car pulled out of the lot. A bird somewhere. The ordinary world continuing its business. I can't do that, Ethan said. She nodded. She had known it was coming, and she nodded like someone who accepts a blow they've earned. Lucas, he said, and his voice changed on the word, became harder and softer simultaneously, the way it always did when his son was the subject. I have to tell him something. I don't know what yet, but I have to be careful about how, because he feels things in a big way, and he doesn't recover fast. And I'm asking you, whatever happens, whatever you decide to do or say, give me time to handle it right for him.
Yes, she said immediately. Of course, whatever you need.
He looked at her one more time, and in his face was something she hadn't seen there before. Not anger, not coldness, but a grief that was clear and unashamed and belonged entirely to a man who had wanted something to be real and had discovered, too late, the specific cost of that wanting. Take care of yourself, he said. He got in his truck. He drove away. She sat in the parking lot for a long time. The week that followed was the hardest she had moved through since the hospital. Harder in some ways, because in the hospital she had been unconscious for most of the worst of it, and this she had to be awake for, completely and without mercy to herself. She went back to work in a way she hadn't fully gone back to work in months, threw herself into the foundation, the board decisions she'd been deferring, the meetings she'd been half present for. Marcus didn't say anything. He just made sure she had coffee and cleared her afternoon schedule on Thursday when she sat in her office for 45 minutes without looking at anything, and he correctly identified that as a situation requiring space rather than agenda items. She didn't contact Ethan. She had said whatever he needed, and she meant it, and she sat with the silence of his number in her phone and did not call it. She thought about Lucas constantly. She thought about the way he'd looked at her across the diner table that last morning, the careful, perceptive look, logging the texture of the silence, storing it for later analysis. She thought about what Ethan was telling him, and what Lucas was doing with it, and whether that boy, who had decided on her with such complete, uncalculating trust, was lying awake in his small room on Birch Street, trying to understand why the woman he'd saved things to tell had disappeared. She thought about that, and it was the worst thing. On a Wednesday, 18 days after the parking lot, Marcus knocked on her office door and came in with a face that meant something had happened. "What?" she said. He set his tablet on her desk. He didn't say anything. He just waited. It was a hospital record. A referral notice from Dr. Naran's office to the Pediatric Cardiac Surgery Department at Children's National. An emergency escalation. The arrhythmia episode from 2 months ago had been followed by a second one, more significant, and the surgical timeline had moved from 12 to 18 months to immediately. The procedure was scheduled. Lucas Cole, age 8, septal myectomy. Estimated cost, $240,000. Insurance coverage pending review. Out-of-pocket gap estimate, $70,000 to $90,000. She looked at the document. "How did you get this?" she said. "I've been monitoring," Marcus said carefully, "since you told me about the boy's condition. I set up a flag on—" "That's not legal." "No," he said, "it's not." He picked the tablet back up. "I'll destroy it. I just needed you to see it." She sat very still. She thought about Ethan in the diner, months ago, with that particular look on his face when Lucas got up to ask the waitress about pie. The look of a man watching something he built become itself. She thought about him in the doctor's waiting room, learning the number, doing the math in the dark. She knew he'd done it in the dark, because that was who he was. The man who carried things quietly, so his son didn't have to feel the weight of them. She thought about a foggy roadside, about being pulled from a burning car by a stranger who didn't ask for anything, who said 4 words, "You're safe now," and disappeared before anyone could attach a debt to him. She looked at Marcus. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "I know," he said. "Anonymously," she said. "Completely, fully, irrevocably anonymous. Nothing traceable. Nothing that can be connected to the foundation or to me. Not a hint." "I know," he said again. "He cannot know it was me," she said. Her voice was flat and certain. "Not because I'm ashamed of it, because that's not what this is. If he finds out it was me, it becomes—" She stopped. "It becomes about us. And it can't be about us. It has to just be, the surgery gets paid for, the boy lives. That's it. That's the whole thing." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "And after?" She thought about what came after. She thought about the parking lot of a hospital, waiting alone, and about a man who had done exactly this, paid a debt with himself, quietly, and gotten in his truck and driven away. "After," she said, "I wait, and I accept whatever happens." He nodded. He picked up his tablet. He walked to the door. "Marcus," she said. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has worked for someone long enough to understand the full shape of who they are, including the parts they don't show anyone else. "It's a good thing you're doing," he said. "It's the only thing," she said. He left. She sat in her office in the afternoon light. She thought about Ethan's face when he'd looked at her in the parking lot. The grief in it, clear and unashamed. And she thought about his son in a hospital bed with a repaired heart, and a father who would be sitting beside him. And she thought, let that be enough. Let it just be enough. She thought that, and she almost believed it. And then she stopped trying to believe it, and just sat with the truth of it instead. The plain, unmanaged, unoptimized truth that she had not felt this way about anything in longer than she could accurately trace, and that doing the right thing hurt in exact proportion to how much the wrong thing had cost. And that was probably how it was supposed to work. She transferred $240,000 through 3 intermediary accounts Marcus had set up for exactly this kind of anonymous foundation work. She specified that the full amount was to cover the procedure, the recovery, and the post-operative follow-up care, with enough of a buffer that Ethan would not have to make a single additional phone call about money for this. She added one instruction, handwritten on a note to the hospital's financial coordinator. This is for Lucas Cole. He is 8 years old, and he is loved. Please make sure his father knows his boy is going to be okay. She did not sign it. Then she drove to Children's National. She parked in the visitor lot on the south side of the building, where she could not be seen from the entrance. She was there by 7 in the morning, the day of the surgery. She had her coffee. She had her phone, which she didn't look at. She had the quiet of an early morning in a hospital parking lot, which was a specific kind of quiet that she knew well by now. The held-breath quiet of a place where things are being determined. She waited. She was not waiting to be found. She was not waiting for a scene or a reconciliation or any of the other outcomes she might have once been arranging for. She was just there, present for something that mattered to her, without requiring that her presence be acknowledged or rewarded. It was the most honest she had been since she gave a man the wrong name in a grocery store parking lot on a January Saturday and told herself it was just temporary. Inside the building, a surgeon she'd never meet was doing something extraordinary to a small boy's heart. Outside, in a car no one was looking for, Victoria Ashford sat with her coffee and waited, and did not ask for anything back. The surgery took 6 hours and 40 minutes. Ethan knew this because he counted. Not the way you count when you're trying to pass time, but the way you count when counting is the only thing that keeps your hands from shaking. Deliberately, mechanically, 1 minute at a time, like a man building something out of the only material available to him. He'd been in the waiting room since 5:30 in the morning. He'd driven Lucas to the hospital in the dark, with the radio off and his son in the passenger seat, wearing the expression he always wore when he was trying very hard not to be frightened. That careful, assembled look, chin slightly up, hands folded on his knees with a precision that was not natural to an 8-year-old boy, and broke Ethan's heart every single time he saw it. "You don't have to be brave right now," Ethan had said, somewhere on Route 9 in the dark. "I know," Lucas said, "but it helps." Ethan had looked at the road. "Yeah," he said, "it does." They had gotten through the pre-op the way they got through most hard things. Together, quietly, with a particular economy of two people who had been each other's entire support structure long enough to know when words helped and when they didn't. The nurses were good. The surgical team was better. Dr. Hensley, the pediatric cardiac surgeon, was a compact, direct woman with close-cropped gray hair and a manner so calm it functioned almost like medication. And when she shook Lucas's hand and told him the procedure was something she'd done more than 200 times, Lucas had looked at her and said, "What's your success rate?" She'd smiled, a real one, not the managed kind. "Better than I deserve," she'd said, "but you're going to add to it." Lucas had thought about this. "Okay," he said. And then they'd taken him back, and Ethan was alone in the waiting room with a cup of bad coffee and 6 hours and 40 minutes to count. He thought about many things. He thought about Karen, which he almost never did anymore. Not with bitterness, not even with much sadness, just with the flat, factual acknowledgement of a chapter that had ended and left certain conditions in its wake. He thought about the house on Birch Street and the birdhouse on the back porch and the fish tank at Dr. Naran's office that Lucas had been drawing since he was 4. He thought about a foggy road and a car on its roof, and a man who had stopped because stopping was simply what you did. He thought about Victoria. He had been thinking about Victoria for 18 days, in the particular way you think about something when you're actively trying not to. Circling it, accounting for it in your peripheral vision, making adjustments around it without looking directly at it. He had told Lucas that Claire had needed to handle something personal, and that she wasn't going to be at the diner for a while. And Lucas had looked at him with those careful eyes and said, "Is it because of what happened that Saturday?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Something like that." "Are you going to fix it?" "I don't know yet." Lucas had been quiet. Then, "She wasn't pretending. Whatever else she did, she wasn't pretending about us." Ethan had looked at his son. "What makes you say that?" "Because I can tell," Lucas said simply. "I've always been able to tell. You know I can." And Ethan did know. He had always known that about his son. The specific, unnerving accuracy of that boy's perception. The way he read people, not by what they said, but by the quality of their attention, the texture of their care. Lucas had decided on Claire, on Victoria, not because she'd performed warmth at him, but because she'd been present for him in a way that couldn't be faked. And if anyone could tell the difference, it was Lucas. Ethan had sat with that. He was still sitting with it, in a hospital waiting room at 11:47 in the morning when the financial coordinator found him. She was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular manner of someone about to deliver unexpected information. And she sat down beside him and said, "Mr. Cole, I wanted to speak with you before the surgery concluded." He looked at her. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong." She paused. "I wanted to tell you that your son's surgical costs have been covered. The full amount,
Procedure, recovery, post-operative care, the follow-up program. There's no outstanding balance. There won't be one.
Ethan looked at her. What?
An anonymous donation was made to cover your son's treatment in full, she said. We received it 2 days ago. It was structured specifically to cover Lucas Cole's procedure and recovery, with a buffer for any complications.
He stared at her.
Anonymous, he said. Yes, sir, completely anonymous. The donor specified no contact, no recognition, no identification.
He was quiet for a long time. The waiting room hummed around him. The distant PA system, someone's phone, the low background noise of a building full of people in the middle of the most important days of their lives.
There was a note, the coordinator said. She took a small, folded card from her jacket pocket and held it out to him.
Handwritten. The donor asked us to make sure you received it. He took it. He unfolded it. This is for Lucas Cole. He is 8 years old, and he is loved. Please make sure his father knows his boy is going to be okay. No signature. He read it twice. He folded it along its crease. He held it in both hands and looked at the floor, and the coordinator sat with him for a moment in the respectful silence of someone who understands they are witnessing something private. And then she quietly excused herself and left him alone. He sat there. He thought about what he knew. He thought about it with the same thoroughness he brought to everything, going through it slowly, not rushing the conclusion, laying it out the way you lay out the parts of something you need to understand before you can fix it. He thought about a woman who had carried a lie for months because she was afraid of becoming a transaction. He thought about what it would cost a person like that, a person who ran a foundation and sat on boards and understood exactly the leverage available to her to do something like this and ask for absolutely nothing back. He thought about what he'd done on a foggy October night on Route 9, and how afterward he'd told Frank it was a cabinet door, and turned the page on the newspaper story and gone back to his ordinary life without a single thought of what his silence had cost him. Because that was just what you did when you did something for the right reason. He understood something then, not a new thing, a thing he'd known in the abstract, in the general, the way you know things you've believed for a long time without ever being required to test them. He understood it now in the specific, in the particular, in the form of a handwritten note on a small folded card that didn't have a name on it. He put the card in his jacket pocket, close to his chest. He waited for his son. Doctor. Hensley came through the door at 1:14 in the afternoon. She was still in her surgical cap, and she was moving with the particular energy of someone at the end of a long, successful effort, and she crossed the waiting room directly to where Ethan was standing. He'd stood up the moment the door opened, the way you stand when the thing you've been waiting for finally arrives. And she said, "He did great. He is completely great. The procedure went exactly the way it was supposed to go, and he is in recovery and asking for you." Ethan put both hands over his face for exactly 3 seconds. Then he took them down and said, "Can I see him?" "Come on," she said. Lucas was pale and small in the recovery bed, and had approximately 6 attachments that Ethan was trying not to count. But his eyes were open and tracking, and when Ethan sat down beside him and took his hand, Lucas said, in a voice still thick with anesthesia, "Did it work?" "It worked," Ethan said. "Good," Lucas said. He blinked slowly. "I was right about Dr. Hensley." "You were right about Dr. Hensley." "I'm good at people," Lucas said. "The best," Ethan said. His voice was steady. His hand on his son's was not. Lucas closed his eyes, opened them again after a moment. "Is Claire coming?" Ethan looked at his son's face, at the color slowly returning to it, at the small, reliable chest, rising and falling with the steadiness of a heart that was, for the first time in 8 years, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm going to go find out." Lucas's eyes drifted closed again. "Good," he said, already most of the way back to sleep. "You should." Ethan sat with him for 20 minutes. He watched his son breathe. He did not count the minutes this time. He just let them be what they were, unhurried and full. The particular fullness of time you stop taking for granted when you've spent enough of it being afraid you won't have enough. Then he squeezed Lucas's hand once, stood up, and walked out of the recovery room, down the corridor, through the main lobby, and out the front entrance into the thin afternoon light. He stopped on the sidewalk. He thought about where she would park. He thought about who she was and how she operated, and what she had said in the parking lot of a diner 18 days ago. "I just wanted to keep having the Saturdays." He thought about what it meant to drive to a hospital early in the morning and sit outside it, and not announce yourself, and not ask for anything, and just be there, present for something that mattered, without requiring that your presence be acknowledged. He knew where she would park. He walked around to the south lot. She was in the 3rd row. Her car was a dark blue sedan with hand controls and a slight film of dust on the windshield that said she'd been here for a while and hadn't moved. She was facing away from the entrance, and he came up from the side, and she saw him when he was about 20 feet away. She went very still. He walked to her window. She didn't roll it down for a moment, just looked at him through the glass, with an expression that was the most unguarded he'd ever seen on her face, stripped of everything she usually kept between herself and the world. Then she rolled the window down. They looked at each other. "How is he?" she said. "He's good," Ethan said. "Surgery went perfectly. He's asking for pie already, basically." Something moved through her face so fast and so complete that she couldn't catch it. Relief and grief and something that was neither, all of it at once. And she pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment and looked away and then back. "Good," she said. Her voice was not steady. "That's good. How long have you been here?" "Since 7. He looked at her. "You've been sitting out here since 7 in the morning." "I wasn't going to come in," she said. "I just needed to—" She stopped, started again. "I needed to be somewhere close, that's all." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The financial coordinator found me." She said nothing, but something in her face tightened, and she held his gaze without flinching. The way a person looks at you when they've decided to accept whatever's coming. "You could have put your name on it," he said. "I didn't want my name on it." "I know." "It wasn't about my name," she said. "It was about—" She paused. "He needed the surgery. That was the whole thing. I didn't want you to have to—" She stopped again, took a breath. "I didn't want money to be the thing that stood between him and being okay. That's all it was." Ethan looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the diner table for months. Carefully. Thoroughly. The way a man looks at something he wants to understand completely, rather than quickly. "I owe you an apology," he said. She blinked. "You, what?" "Not for what I said. For some of how I said it." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "I was clear with you, but I wasn't as fair as I could have been. You made a bad decision at the start, for reasons that were real. And everything after it was real. I knew that when I was sitting in that parking lot, and I let myself be angrier than the situation warranted, because I was—" He stopped, said it plainly. "Because I was hurt. And I'm not somebody who usually leads with hurt. So I led with principle instead. And there's truth in the principle. But there was also hurt underneath it. And you deserve to know the difference. She stared at him. Ethan, she said. I'm not finished, he said, with the ghost of something that might become a smile. She closed her mouth. Lucas told me you weren't pretending, he said. I already knew that. He just said it out loud. He looked at the windshield, then back at her. And I know you're afraid of what happens when people know who you are. I know that fear is real and earned, and not something I can argue you out of. But I want you to hear me when I tell you that I knew who you were before I knew your name. I knew what you were made of in a diner on a Saturday morning, and in a backyard, and on a Thursday night phone call when you said, "Tell him I'm bringing the good apples," and you didn't know that was going to matter as much as it did. Her eyes were wet. She didn't blink it away. The name was wrong, he said. I need you to not do that again. Not because of the principle of it, because of what it costs you to carry a thing like that. I watched you carry it for months, and you are... He paused, chose carefully. You are somebody who should not have to carry things alone. That's not weakness. That's just true. She breathed in slowly. I don't know how to do that, she said. I've been doing it alone for a very long time. I know, he said. So have I. He looked at her directly. We could try something different. The afternoon sat around them. A bird landed on a nearby light post and regarded them briefly and departed, as if it had assessed the situation and decided it was being handled. You should know, she said quietly, that being with me is not a simple thing. My life it's complicated. There are boards and donors and press and people who will have opinions about who I spend my time with. It is not a quiet life. I've got a kid with a repaired heart and a birdhouse that doesn't meet code, Ethan said. My life is not simple either. She almost laughed. Almost. It caught in her throat and came out as something between a breath and a sound. And she looked at him with the unguarded face she still hadn't learned to put away. That birdhouse, she said. Lucas wants your input on the roof design, he said. He's been saving that conversation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ethan. Yeah, I'm sorry. She said it without preamble, without negotiation. For the name, for the months of it, for every Saturday where I had the chance to tell you and didn't. I am genuinely, fully sorry. He looked at her. I know you are. That's it, she said. That's all? That's all, he said. It's enough. She looked at him with the expression of someone receiving something they had not allowed themselves to expect, and not yet knowing what to do with the weight of it. He understood that. He thought about what it was to move through the world as a person who had learned to expect very little from people. Not because you were cynical, but because the evidence had accumulated over time and you'd adjusted accordingly. He understood that probably better than she expected him to. Come inside, he said. He's going to want to see you when he wakes up. She looked at the hospital entrance. She looked at him. I don't want to intrude on... He asked for you, Ethan said. About 20 minutes ago, under fairly significant anesthesia, which means it was the unfiltered version. He paused. He asked if you were coming. I told him I was going to go find out. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for her door. He stepped back to give her room. She transferred to her chair with a practiced efficiency he'd stopped noticing months ago. It was simply how she moved through the world, the same way he moved through it, with calloused hands and a truck that needed its rear brakes done. She straightened, settled, looked up at him. Ethan, she said. Yeah? Route 9, she said. October 14th. She held his gaze. I know you never wanted to be thanked. I know that's the whole point. But I need you to know. She stopped, collected herself. I need you to know that I understand what you did. Not just the act of it, the whole thing. The walking away, the not taking the credit. What that costs a person, and why you did it anyway. Her voice was steady and certain and meant every word. I understand it because you showed me. Over the past several months, every Saturday, you showed me what it looks like when a person is actually good. Not performing goodness, actually being it. And she paused. I'm a different person than I was before that night. Not because of the accident, because of who I met in the aftermath of it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly, You're pretty good yourself, when you're not giving people the wrong name. She laughed, a real one, the one he'd catalogued without intending to, the unguarded, genuine laugh that was completely without performance. He smiled, the real one. He walked beside her across the parking lot, and through the entrance of the hospital, and down the corridor toward his son, and she kept pace beside him. And the afternoon light came through the lobby windows in long, flat angles, and neither of them said anything, because neither of them needed to. Lucas woke up at 3:47, groggy and pale and more present than the anesthesia should have allowed, with the specific determination of a child who has decided something important is worth surfacing for. He turned his head on the pillow and saw his father first, and then he turned a little further and saw her, and the expression that crossed his face was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who had calculated something correctly and was receiving confirmation. I knew you'd come, he said. His voice was rough and quiet and certain. I said I would, Victoria said. She moved closer. She put her hand over his, the same way Ethan had, and Lucas looked at their two hands, his father's on one side, hers on the other, and something in him visibly settled. Am I going to be okay? He asked. Yeah, his father said. You are. Promise? Ethan looked at his son. He looked at the color in his face and the steadiness of his breathing, and the monitors that were doing what they were supposed to do, and the surgeon who had said he did great, with the certainty of a person who had meant it. Promise, he said. Lucas closed his eyes. His hand held both of theirs, small and warm between them. Good, he said. That's good. A pause. His voice was fading back towards sleep. Claire? She looked at him. Yeah? Your real name, he murmured. What is it? She was quiet for a moment. Victoria, she said. Lucas turned this over in the slow way of someone half asleep. That's a good name, he said. And then, with a complete uncalculating certainty of a child who has always known exactly who he trusts, you can be Victoria then. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, and she did not look away. Okay, she said. I can do that. He slept. Ethan looked at her over his son's bed. She looked back at him, and in the quiet of that room, with the monitors and the afternoon light, and the small, steady presence of a boy with a repaired heart sleeping between them, something settled into place. Not loudly, not with ceremony or declaration, just the plain, unhurried arrival of something that had been working its way toward this for a long time, through a foggy road and a false name and a parking lot and a truth told 18 days too late and a note that had no signature because it had never been about the signature. It settled, and it stayed. That was how it began, the real beginning, the one that counted, not with a rescue or a revelation or a perfectly timed confession,
but with two people in a hospital room holding a child's hands and deciding, without words, that the next part would be built on something solid.
Because that is what love actually looks like when it's real. Not the moment it arrives, but the moment both people choose to stay and build something honest out of whatever's left after the truth has done its work. Some acts of grace go unwitnessed. Some kindnesses carry no names. Some of the most important things that ever happen between people begin in the most ordinary of places. A roadside, a parking lot, a diner booth. A Saturday morning that looks like nothing from the outside and is everything from the inside. And sometimes the person you pull out of the dark is not the one you expected. Sometimes it goes both ways. Sometimes saving someone is a thing that happens slowly, over months, in the unremarkable accumulation of small and genuine moments. And by the time you understand what has happened, you are already somewhere you could not have anticipated and would not trade for anything. Ethan Cole had stopped because stopping was simply what you did, and everything that mattered had followed from that one quiet, unremarkable, completely ordinary act of grace. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was enough.